Physical and cognitive development in late adulthood is of utmost importance for various reasons. During middle adulthood, as you already learned, there was little research that was done on individuals who were just aging due to primary aging. It was mostly due to or done on individuals who had brain trauma or special circumstances. At this point, we will see that there are going to be some changes that are not so gradual, and we're also going to see that with the advancement of technology and medicine, we are able to preserve life long past what we were able to a few decades ago, and this presents a lot of social challenges. So let's look at the physical and cognitive development in the last stage of our life, which is late adulthood. It is important for us to understand that as we advance again medically and technology, we are able to prolong our lives. Now, the question has been asked as to whether there is good quality of life or just quantity. And the answer is not as simply answered as some may think. We do know that centenarians, which are people who live to the age of 100, are the fastest growing segment of the population in countries like the United States and other developed nations. We currently have about 60,000 that live in the United States, and in just a little bit over 30 years, we're expected to have more than 800,000. So you could see that this is made possible thanks to medicine and technology, but it also presents problems as to will they be able to work? Will retirement alone be enough to be able to take care of the expenses? And some people believe that it may just fall in the hands of the younger generation. So there are those who believe that higher taxes are just around the corner to be able to pay for the centenarians. Gerontology is the scientific study of aging, and what it basically reveals to us is that the maximum life expectancy it's about 120 years old thus far. The death rates do increase dramatically when humans reach their 60s, but among studying individuals in this group, the field of gerontology has broken up the older group into young old, which are those ages 60 to 75, old old, which are those ages 75 to 85, and the oldest old, which are ages 85 and over. And again, as we stated earlier, it's the fastest growing segment of the population. Not always have we been able to reach 100 so easily. In the United States, life expectancy in the 1930s for males was 58, for females 62. In 2010, we find that it was 75 and average for females 82. Now we find that for males is 82 and for women 86. And the average 65-year-old who gets there with good health is and a male is likely to live to 82 years of age. If a female gets to 65 in good age, they're likely to live till 85. Also, average 85-year-old that gets there in decent health is likely to live to 91 if male and 92 if female. As we get older, again, we begin to realize that the milestones are around the corner, and we also understand that death is inevitable and closer than ever. Surprisingly, despite their proximity with death and perhaps deteriorating health, the majority of older adults, all three subgroups, regard their health as good, despite the fact that they may not be 100% healthy. My grandma, who has arthritis in her knees, every time I speak to her and I ask how you're doing, she says she is well. And she has a smile and laughter and something to share. Whereas sometimes you ask me how I'm doing, I don't sound so well, and my ailments, health and otherwise, seem to be far less impactful and severe than they are in her. I also find that the majority maintain an optimistic view of themselves and their lives, again, despite their growing physical challenges. And we find that this optimism is also correlated with better health. As optimistic as they are, we understand that there are now some limitations that they'll have in activities. And the activities of daily living, which are what we know as ADLs, are those where there's self help tasks such as taking a bath, getting dressed, and using the toilet. These are often dealt with a sense of embarrassment and reluctance by a lot of people, as not necessarily because they'd be seen naked, but because of what it represents. There seems to be resilience in them, and uh, this seems to be an indication that things have gone south quite quickly. Whereas IADLs, instrumental activities of daily living, those are tasks that are more intellectually demanding, and oftentimes the elderly would not oppose to this as much as they would oppose ADLs, such as handling money, housework, cooking, and for that, and there's often little resistance toward that. We have those who are considered frail elderly, and those are those who cannot take care for themselves at all. And in that case, then both of these would be done for them. The two most common chronic health conditions that we see among the elderly are hypertension, which is high blood pressure, and arthritis. Arthritis is characterized by pain and stiffness and inflammation of the joints. And we find that women are more likely to suffer from arthritis than men. Exercise throughout our entire life is important. We find that it may be even more important in later years than in earlier years. It is important to be active earlier in life, but we find that exercise after 40 can help and has been believed to be associated with the prevention of the height loss. And so weights and water exercises, walking if possible, is very, very good for us as we age. The mental exercise, which is continuous brain stimulation, would also help reduce the information processing speed loss that would occur thereafter. So, engaging in crossword puzzles and other tasks like Tetris that would allow us to constantly engage in thought process could help us stay sharp. As we get older, our systems begin to reduce their activities and their efficiency, and we find that the brain and the nervous system are not the exception. There are various changes, but there are four main changes that have been observed, and one is that the weight overall of the brain is reduced. This is believed to be associated with the loss of gray matter, which you'll know has to do with the dendrites and the soma of the cell, not necessarily the myelination. And the density and the decline in the dendrites is also believed to be associated with lower synaptic speed, which has a lot to do with our reaction time. Again, we discussed in previous slides that there are individuals who are more likely to get in car accidents as we get older, and that is because we process the information much slower. So if we were to see a car um, 200 feet away, we may think that we have time, and by the time we react and our foot steps on the gas, it may have been too soon, and realize then that it wasn't a good move or a good call to take it or try to beat it. One of the ways in which we could probably reduce the cerebral cortex atrophy that is likely to happen later in life is by having more years of schooling. We actually find that the more we expose ourselves to school, to classes, the less cerebral cortex atrophy that we'll experience in ages 60 to 90 years of age. Our senses will also begin to deteriorate and not be as effective as they were when we were younger. Vision, in addition to the presbyopia that we discussed in earlier chapters, we can also have other vision defects. We find that a reduced field of vision is likely to be due to an enlarged blind spot on the retina. When we talk about blind spot, is basically what's known as the optic nerve in the back of our eye. There's our retina made up of rods and cones, but there is a gap in between, if you will, and that's known as the optic nerve. That's there for us to be able to send the information, the signals from the retina to the back of the brain, the occipital lobe. However, as we get older, this blind spot or this optic nerve would get larger, and as a result of that, it would reduce our field of vision as our blind spot would increase. Now, the people would also not be as good at dilating as it used to, and this would bring about difficulties at seeing at night or responding to rapid changes in brightness. Hearing is the other sense that we're likely to also lose in a gradual fashion. Uh, we're more likely to experience hearing loss as men than women, and this is believed to be associated with the differential exposure to noise, either in the workplace or earlier in life. The loss after age 60 is typically one that has to be about 1 to 2 decibels louder each ear for the individual to report that he hears it. Um, the hearing loss due to the degeneration from the outer to the inner ear, and also because of greater amounts of earwax secretion that takes place. We find that as we get older, there is more production of earwax, and sometimes our hearing loss could be solved as easily by going over to ENT doctor, in which they'll initially they may just wash it off, or they may then do a procedure in which they declog your ears, if you will. And there's often a large amount of earwax, and that could definitely keep us from hearing well. Again, as we get older, the chances of getting in a car accident or just accidents in general are greater, and this is believed to be caused by what is known as general slowing. Our body is no longer going to respond as fast as it used to, and that is because of the dendritic loss that is appearing at the neuronal level. This would basically reduce the speed of the nerve impulses, and as a result of that, our muscles would not react as fast as they did when we were younger. We would also find that adults at the age of 80 have more accidents per miles driven, and that is again because of their inability to judge the speed of the oncoming traffic or the distance at which the cars would be traveling or pedestrians. Adults older than the age of 65 often wake up more frequently during the night, and this could be for various reasons. It could be because of bladder reasons, having to pee, or also because of circadian rhythms. We find that decreases in REM sleep are also seen, so they're not getting the 20% we used to get when we were adults. They may be getting less. And they're also more likely to be morning people instead of night people. However, despite their decrease in sleeping time continues during the night, they do make up for it by napping more regularly throughout the day, assuming that they have the time to do so. The sexuality of the elderly is expected to decline gradually in middle adulthood, and this is due to the decline of testosterone levels in both men and women, sometimes blood pressure medication, chronic pain, or even also antidepressants and various other medications. We do find that more than 70% of elders in the young old subgroup remain sexually active, whereas about 50% of the elders in the old subgroup remain sexually active. We in fact see that there are some of the oldest old group that remain sexually active still. And the reason why is because as long as the heart is okay, we are expected to respond and remain sexually active until we are almost right at before death. The physiological capacity to respond to sexual stimulation appears to not diminish with age. It will decrease in frequency, but the responses, the orgasmic response, as well as the arousal, is appears to be the same in later adulthood. Our mental health is of interest for individuals. For the most part, the anxiety and depression and various other things, if seen, they're seen at mild forms, unless there is some sense a great loss, such as a loss of a loved one, and then even then we'll see gender differences among our responses. But Alzheimer's disease is one of the most studied, as well as when we look at neurological issues such as Parkinson's. This is an illness that's characterized in part by severe memory problems, but it's not only memory problems. It is death at worst. It's the fourth leading cause of death among adults in the United States, and we find that it starts off typically with just forgetfulness of simple things. Eventually, it reach levels where the memory loss is more profound, such as forgetting how to use a phone or where we live. And with advanced stage, we could see that individuals may lose their ability to speak and comprehend language, as well as deteriorating their physical ability to respond, and often again leading to death. The causes are not fully understood, but it is believed to be an inherited susceptibility that can lead to problems in the production of a particular protein called beta amyloid. And this beta amyloid is in excess is likely to lead to clumping of the cells. You may remember the neurons need to connect with one another, but they're not physically connected. Well, with an excess amount of beta amyloid, we would see that there would be a clumping of these cells, if you will, which would trigger an inflammation and form a plaque that would deteriorate the neurons in the brain and not allow them to fire. This is why we would not be able to remember and ultimately die if we were to impact the central core or the parts of the brain that control the vital functions. As far as our memory, we may have some age-related memory decline that doesn't have to be associated with Alzheimer's. This is often due to just changes in our brain overall, changes in the ratio of gray to white matter in the brain, in which we will see that and there could be also a reduction in the volume of the hippocampus. And if you remember, that is the part that consolidates our memories. So we would see that these two combined, and there can also make it more difficult for us to remember things. Here you can see a long-term memory module that is basically where we would store the content that made it past sensory and short-term. And we find that it's broken up into two forms, declarative and procedural memory. We find that for the most part, individuals elderly seem to be good at memorizing or recalling episodic memories, and that is events that occurred in a particular time, place, and context, and mostly on personal knowledge. So remembering something that occurred to me is something that we see elderly excel in, whereas the procedural memory is likely to sometimes be remembered only if it's something that was practiced significantly in earlier stages of our development.